So,
Hey,
nice to
man.
meet you.
Yeah.
So, the first thing I'm going to ask you is just I've gone through your website, great videos, lots of great content, um, and I'm new to Unity Earth. Uh, so, to people who don't know what Unity Earth is, could you give me a bit of background as to what is what does your group do, and how did it come to be? How did you come to that idea?
Yeah. It's a long story. It goes back. It goes back about 40,000 years, Samir, in many ways. So it's probably impossible to start the story anywhere else. But through the indigenous occupation or indigenous presence here in Australia, I have a profound kind of family connection, which is all a bit of a mystery. But in the late 60s and early 70s, my father, who's an earth scientist, a geomorphologist, was doing some research work up in Western New South Wales on what's now dry lake system. And he kept finding evidence of human occupation. Now, in the late 60s and early 70s, the scientific view was that Aboriginal people had been in Australia for about 10 or 12,000 years. So when he discovered human remains dated over 40,000 years, what became Mungo Lady and then later on Mungo Man discoveries completely changed our understanding of how long Aboriginal people had been here. And not only that, but these burials were ceremonial in nature. There was ceremonial fire. There was even ochre present in the burials because of the dignity of death that was associated. And so here we have evidence of ritual burial 44,000 years ago on the shores of a dry salt lake in New South Wales, of a dry lake in New South Wales, and how that then really formed my own life, I guess. Mungo Man was discovered in 1974. I was born in 1973, so my whole life has kind of grown up with this, and that area became a World Heritage area. But I've grown up my whole life with my dad saying, we've got so much to learn from those Aboriginal people, and we've got so much to learn from their way of life, and that we in the West have lost something that they profoundly hold. So I guess that is been imprinted on me in a very, very deep level, and a big part of the Unity Earth story, Samir, and there's many layers to it. But a big part of it was when we got involved with the return to country of Mungo Man in 2017, when the human remains were finally returned back to the land where they were found, where they come from. And there was a very powerful healing and ceremony. So our work at Unity Earth was put together a team that put on a free event and gathered musicians and dancers from right across Australia to commemorate in song and ceremony this extraordinary return to country of this ancestral being at 40,000 plus years, not just belonging to the Aboriginal people, but really an ancestor in many ways for all of humanity. We put it on the timeline that Jesus was 2,000 years ago, and Abraham was 3,000 years ago, and the pyramids were 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. To really take that back to fully modern humans at 44,000 years is pretty mind blowing. So to return that universal ancestor back to the Willandra Lakes World Heritage Area in 2007 was a really big step for Unity Earth to be involved in supporting the elders in that happening. And I start the story there because it's really the most appropriate way to begin telling the story of how Unity Earth came to be. And there are many other ways of answering that, but I think that's probably the deepest way. And since then, we've done events in different parts of the world. 2012 is really where many things got going in Chiang Mai in Thailand when we did the first U-Day Festival, which was bringing together music into an intercultural, interfaith space. And we've been building on it ever since then. In 2016, we launched what we call the Road to 2020, which is a series of global events starting at the United Nations in New York and then building up to this return to country in the outback of Australia, onto Africa for U-Day 2018, to Varanasi, and then Holy Land just this February. So a whole sort of series of global events bringing together spiritual leaders, religious leaders, Indigenous leaders, musicians, artists, activists, really everybody coming together in that spirit of unity to commemorate, to celebrate, and to hold ceremony around healing and around awakening. So it's been a real kind of global emergence built up over the last few years, and Unity Earth is in a way holding a space which brings together the spiritual with the ecological and the social. So yeah, that's a beginning answer to maybe a much longer, more sort of fulsome answer. So yeah.
You mentioned the word awakening. Could you talk about, from your perspective, what awakening are you seeing happening individually and globally, and how is Unity Earth factored into that?
Well, I think, when it comes to that experience of awakening, there is no substitute for experience. And we can read about it, we can hear about it, we can study different spiritual traditions, we can learn a lot of intellectual knowledge, but awakening really is something that happens from the inside out. And, it can be spontaneous. I don't think there's any rhyme or reason about setting the conditions for awakening. I think that's certainly something that starts with a yearning or a desire for truth. It needs to be present at some level. And, what we've witnessed is that coming into a field of community and into a certain field of, you could say vibration or just a certain essence, that awakening becomes contagious. An awakening to people to their higher sort of values, to their higher visions, deep hope, radical hope, spontaneous transformations are possible in that field of awakening and transformation. So Unity Earth is focused really on events, bringing people together with music and, uniting spiritual traditions, bringing Indigenous thought leadership in, holding ceremony, reverencing all of the faith traditions of humanity, whether they were birthed in the East or in the West or in the Middle East or wherever they've come from, to really honor deeply those faith and spiritual lineages and traditions. And when you put all of that together in a container which is truly honoring all of those traditions, even the ones going back tens of thousands of years in Indigenous context, it creates a field, Samir, which is very hard to describe. But it is something that we've witnessed transformations, and people feel connected to that, and that lives on through the process now in the Unity Earth community and through our friends and networks. So I think that providing an experience for people is really critical. And one of the ideas about the caravan, we'd been planning this caravan across the United States for many years and had wanted to do something in Europe as well. And then meeting some key people from Co-Creating Europe, the idea emerged of doing it simultaneously at the same time. And that's a tremendously thrilling and exciting, daunting prospect, but a very exciting one, to feel that there's a desire and that there is that it wants to happen, that this rolling series of events building up from the visions to start in Rumi's tomb in Konya, in the mausoleum in Konya. And Rumi's such an incredible figure for universal human spirituality. There are many, but Rumi's a very important one. But rolling across Europe and really taking in all of the history and the legacy and the culture and the essence of European spiritual nature into a climax around Peace Weekend, which is celebrating International Day of Peace around September 19 to 21 this year, 2020. It really is creating the conditions for those experiences to invite people in to a field of awakening and transformation.
You mentioned your the Peace Weekend this year. How did you come up with that idea? I think you have something called the Road to 2020, and you had a series of events that started in 2018 and have happened, and they're carrying on happening up to the Caravan of Unity and the Peace Weekend, which is in September.
That's right.
How did you come up with this idea? What's the purpose? And what do you hope it will bring to people?
I think, it's so much got initiated around December 2012. Like, it's amazing to me the number of people we speak to that were getting involved in stuff or beginning things around that period of time. Of course, a lot of people were excited about the end of the Mayan calendar and these sorts of things. But around the planet, we had this wonderful series of events called Birth 2012. Barbara Marks Hubbard, Steve Dinan, and others, and other organizations did a great job in really creating a global fabric of events at that time. And talking to people a little bit older in the transformational movement, many of them reflect back to 1987, an event called the Harmonic Convergence, which was an important date as well. But it's felt like this, this year, 2020, has been on the horizon for a long, long time. And many people have written about it, have felt that it was extremely significant as a turning point. And here we are in the middle of, as we record this, in the middle of the corona pandemic global shutdown, which you could not have seen 2 months ago, happening to the world. So it felt to us that 2020 was a significant date in that pulse of, from what happened in 2012 and then sort of coming around in another order of being in 2020. So, and writers like Stephen Dine and Barbara Mark Hubbard and many, many others have been referencing 2012 for a long time. So for us, actually, 2016 is when it began, the road to 2020. We kicked it off at the UN Chapel in New York, and this was this global series of events. And the purpose was to build up to this date in September, honoring the International Day of Peace, which has been going for 30-something years at the United Nations and has got incredible traction and buy-in globally. I mean, the International Day of Peace is celebrated all around the world by the UN, but also by many global grassroots organizations and concerts and events and all sorts of wonderful things commemorating that. We looked at the calendar, Samir, and realized that September 21 this year is a Monday. And the idea struck us, a group of us, that wouldn't it be great if we really advocated for this to be the world's first global public holiday, that we could have a shared space for an emerging global culture. And the more we thought about it, the more we realized that you can really define a culture, to a great extent by the holidays that we agree to celebrate. So the nationalistic holidays of all of the countries, or the religious holidays of the various countries. If you look at the holidays, Thanksgiving in the United States or Anzac Day here in Australia, they're very important days that really hold space for values in a culture. So we thought, where's the space for planetary culture? Where's the space for a global culture? Where is it that we get to be, human beings coming together on one planet and really honoring that and commemorating that? Of course, there's Earth Day with its 50th year anniversary this year in 2020, which is a wonderful moment as well. But we felt that just with the resonance that the International Day of Peace has had for such a long time as well, that it was a great opportunity to really hold something that could be spread over a weekend and 3 days events. And people are celebrating it all over the world anyway, from Europe to Africa to Asia, Americas, everywhere is celebrating this global Day of Peace. So the idea of really having something and putting a container around it, making a peace weekend, and having the whole planet really recognize that moment of when we first recognize ourselves as a global culture, and what better prism to look at it through than peace. And the striving for peace. So that was why, the build-up of the road to 2020, the culmination of the Caravan of Unity, all kind of, waves building up to this climax for the International Day of Peace and Peace Weekend, September 19 to 21.
Before the Peace Weekend, there is a Caravan of Unity that you're organizing that's going across America. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What's happening? When does it start? And what's the build-up going to be like?
Yeah, absolutely. We just in February, we had this extraordinary caravan across the Holy Land in 3 countries, Jordan, Palestine, and Israel. And we had 100 spiritual leaders, dignitaries, VIPs, musicians, artists, heads of NGOs. It was a really extraordinary group of people moving across. And we commemorated the United Nations World Interfaith Harmony Week, which was February 1 to 7. And it was an amazing coming together. So it's really carrying those energies that have been building up from the Holy Land, before that India, before that Ethiopia, before that here in Australia, and bringing all of that to the United States and Europe at the same time. So in the context of the United States, we're starting in San Francisco at Grace Cathedral, which is a really big, beautiful cathedral of national importance. It's where the UN Charter was they celebrated after signing in 1975. They then commemorated it in Grace Cathedral. It was the birth of the United Religions Initiative in the year 2000, was in Grace Cathedral. So it's a very significant place. It's where things begin. So we're starting the Caravan of Unity on August the 28th there, and then moving through California to Vegas, up to Colorado, across the Midwest, Chicago, and then Philadelphia and into New York. on the International Day of Peace, or Peace Weekend. So it's a whole series of about 4 weeks of events, moving, rolling across the United States, again, with the Indigenous leadership, thought leadership, visionary, transformational NGOs heads, visionary artists, musicians, grassroots organizers, really all coming together. Some of them motivated by ecological concerns, some of them motivated by visions for a better world. I think all of them to some degree motivated by that. At different points of motivation, but coming together as one fabric of transformation and showing up en masse at this time to really commemorate and to usher, I think, in some transformations, both at personal as well as national and planetary levels.
Okay. So there's a lot of amazing things that you're doing. And I want to pull out some of your experiences, because you've been on these buses with many Indigenous leaders and you've been on these journeys with them. So you must have picked up a lot of wisdom from these people. So can you share some of your experiences and maybe kind of distill them into kind of feeling, what have you felt traveling with these people? What kind of wisdoms are they sharing with you? And what's the kind of universal idea that they're bringing to the table?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's so much there's so much truth that experience is the master teacher, and more than anything else, we really become who we hang out with, who you hang around. And so I've been very privileged, very fortunate, Samir, to spend time with some extraordinary souls and to learn. And I guess it's challenged my own ideas. It's challenged my own certainty around things. It's helped me to open up my mind and my heart to broader realities and bigger realities, and to experience things that I would never have experienced before. It's interesting, I mentioned before about my dad, but he's been hitting over the head. He's 90 years old now, but been hitting us over the head with, that we've got something to learn from these Indigenous people, that the intuitive way of connecting with the life is something essential that we lost through our enlightenment and the whole prioritization of logic and rationality over the intuitive connection to nature and to life of the spirit. And for a lot of my life, I kind of just disregarded that, kind of went in one ear and out the other, and thought, oh, the old man's a little bit romantic with his ideas. But it wasn't until I really got to spend time with Indigenous people, really, meaningful ways, like doing events together and planning and preparing and hanging out and laughing and breaking bread and, really having experiences that I got to really feel what it means, their connection that they have to nature, to the trees, to the stars, to the sky, to the water, to the earth itself, and to experience that for myself as a living reality, not just a concept, but an actual living reality and experience. And that definitely transformed me. I guess I had some preconceived ideas, or probably even some arrogance or conceit about what I thought I knew and what I thought was true. And these experiences really helped me to break through a lot of that, and to I guess humbled me to really open up to things I wouldn't have experienced otherwise. So it's a very humbling process. Sometimes it can be disorientating as you're dropping away these layers of belief and layers of judgments that we have, or ideas that we've built up over time. But the world is a mysterious and wonderful place, and the universe, even more so. So for me to be on this journey with leaders and wisdom carriers has been tremendously powerful. The other thing I will say is, one thing that really most of them, if not all of them, have in common is a deep sense of joy. And despite the fact that we might be calling grief and pain and suffering, and that's very real, but beyond that, there's a sense of lightheartedness and joy that I've experienced with these spiritual awakened people, masters, evolved people, and some of them are like everyday folks, but they've just achieved a level of mastery through the way that they live their lives and engage with the world, and that there's a joyfulness, and that there's a lightheartedness, and there's just a love that emanates from them, which you can't help but admire and want to reciprocate.
I guess that when you're on these journeys with these spiritual leaders, these Indigenous leaders, there must be some kind of universal message that they have. So, you're talking to all of them. Is there some kind of overarching idea that they all believe in? And when they come together, what do they share? What do they agree upon?
Yeah, it's touching to see the relationships they form, the Buddhist monks with the reggae stars and, the Catholic priest with the Indigenous elders and the visionary musicians with the filmmakers, with the whole gamut of spiritual, religious, Indigenous leadership. It's really touching. I think one of the things that's striking about the community that we've been engaging with and circling around with Unity Earth is that there's a deep humility. Nobody there wants to be the center. Nobody there wants to sort of say, look at me, I've got the answers. There's a much sort of deeper humility. I would say even an earthiness to a lot of those souls. And if there is one universal message, it really has to be, Samir, and I do think it is. We've struggled with the word love in our culture for so long in so many different ways, and there's so many different kinds of love and different levels of meaning to the word. But when you're around people that really are living that love in small ways, the way they treat animals, the way they treat children, it's genuine, it's authentic. It's not a kind of love that will love people because they're important while ignoring, the other people. It's a real love that comes from a deep place of acceptance, self-acceptance, and also, I would say, relationship to God, relationship to the divine by whatever concept people hold. There's a certainty and there's a security in being held that it doesn't matter what else happens. It doesn't matter if everything earthly crashes and falls. There's a sense of security which doesn't need bravado and doesn't need layers of, the sort of ego needs that so many of us have. Just not there. So that the authenticity of the love is able to really come through. So that's been definitely something that's a universal message, whether they're Indigenous, religious, spiritual, conscious, whatever label they may be sort of resonating with or beyond labels. The humility and the relationship to the divine and the real genuine love which emanates from them. These are the hallmarks of people.
So currently we're conducting this interview in April 2020, the middle of the pandemic. We're in lockdown in London and I guess in Australia. It's the same with you guys. So, what would be the message that you think they would give to the world, maybe, or you picked up from them that you could share with people? What do you think that could be?
Yeah, I think the best messages that I've heard from some of these leaders is don't panic. Take care of things, take care of the little things, do the things we need to. Be responsible, act responsibly for yourself and for others. But also, I think, be careful what information we consume. I mean, I love the work that you're doing, Samir, and the makers of this film. It's very important because it's putting an important, positive, hopeful, optimistic, real message out there. And I think now many people have got more time on their hands than perhaps they used to. There's a danger of consuming information which could really provoke a fear response or could provoke a out of control, I can't do anything to impact the reality kind of response, which isn't helpful. So it's one thing to be aware and be knowledgeable and to a certain degree be open to what's going on in the world, but at the same time to stay empowered and to be careful what we consume, what information we consume, not just food and nutrients, but also what's going into our mind. I think there's a great opportunity now for us as individuals to be very deliberate and conscious about what we're feeding our soul, what information, what we're feeding our mind, what stories, what memes, if you like, we're really consuming. So I think that the message is stay hopeful, look for the bright spot in all of this. We've got a way through this. And of course, there's tremendous upside potentially to this terrible crisis. And even just like in an individual, I know one of your partners, Katie from Emerging Proud, is working with individuals who are coming through crisis moments and emerging out of them. And it feels like that's very relevant to us as a planet, having hit some kind of rock bottom, like an addict, addicted to oil, addicted to the animal agricultural industry, addicted to the status quo of the power elites, whatever it is, all of these addictions that humanity has been getting off on, and for so long, it's reached a point now where it is multiple crises all at the same time. And just like an individual who hits rock bottom, the coronavirus may just well be that, that extra straw that breaks the camel's back, if you like. Hopefully, we hope to allow us collectively to make different choices, to make different decisions, to come out of our dark night of the soul, to come out of this crisis moment and into a positive new future. Now, that's not going to be easy. It's going to take in a huge amount of effort and a lot of work and a lot of us really pulling very hard in the same direction. So I think I'm very hopeful, and I think the message of most of the spiritual leaders, I think, in the Unity Earth friends and network would be also being optimistic, but at the same time, be practical. Take care of yourself, take care of your families, do the essentials well, walk the spiritual road with practical feet. But look for the brightness in this dark night of the human crisis point and breaking point, and hopefully rock bottom. Hopefully, this is rock bottom for us.
You mentioned in your journey the Harmonic Convergence, which is something I read about, and that how your work might be linked to this, bringing people together at certain times of the year in certain places. To create unity. For people who don't know about the Harmonic Convergence, could you give a bit of background onto that and then how it links to your work and perhaps what the bigger story might be behind all this, the coming together of people?
Yeah, it's an interesting one to me. I'm no expert on the Harmonic Convergence. I was 14 when it happened, but a number of people, let's say of a slightly older generation, those like 15, 20 years older than me, 10, 15 years older than me, it seemed to be in a big moment back in 1987. There was some astronomical alignment. Interesting enough, here we are in the middle of April 16th here in Australia. And there's another one happening over the next few days, a big astronomical alignment that's happening over these next few days. There's a global silent minute that we're about to commemorate. The Harmonic Convergence, as I said, I'm no expert, but it was something that seemed to have sparked a lot of people around the world in this kind of work, in consciousness, in finding the harmony between spirituality and science, in harmonizing with the physical and the spiritual worlds. It was a big moment. I guess I'm using it in the context of what happened in 2012 and then building up to what happens in 2020. There seemed to be this sort of convergence, moments. And I think we could go back and study a little bit what happened in 1987, but the convergence that we're looking at, we definitely experienced one in 2012. Very, very powerful, even though it was faint, but it's become literally a birth. And I think now, moving into 2012, in the back half of 2012, we're coming into a whole series of pivotal moments and opportunity points and potential portals for humanity.
So, moving a little more into the esoteric ideas behind this, what is going on in this bigger picture then? Could you give your opinion about what's happening?
Well, I'll tell you what I do know is that we have a choice, and this is not predestined. We have some say in what happens next, Samir, and I think that's the essential message that we need to really be sharing with people, is that whatever transformation the planet is going through, and clearly it's going through a lot of turmoil and travail, clearly in our lifetime. But again, that's not taking anything away from generations that went before us. Imagine what people thought in the 1930s. Would have felt just as uncertain, if not even more so. So we have to be careful not to, assume that this is the big one. It may well be, but we need to be cautious about making that assumption. But what we do know is that we have a choice, and I think that there's an opportunity there, and that's all it is. It's an opportunity. It's not a given. So there's an opportunity there for us to make different choices about what we value, about who we are, about what the story we tell ourselves about humanity's place on this earth and in the cosmos, how we relate to each other, how we relate to different narratives, different races, different religions, different faiths, different stories, people who are different. How can we build a more inclusive and more fair and more just, a more equitable society? We have that within our power. And if this period of time is seen by many as a fulfillment of prophecy or as a time of great turning, if that enables us to make the right choices and to take the right actions, then I'm all for it. But there's no sense of just sitting back and letting it happen to us. We really are the agents of our own destiny. And so let's seize this moment collectively to walk together shoulder by shoulder in the right direction, in the good direction for ourselves, for each other, and for all the children to come.
Going back to your group, Unity Earth, and specifically what you do, how would you define your particular role then in this journey? What are you guys doing in particular, and how is that helping this more collective progress?
You know, I think everyone's playing their role. Everyone's got a role to play, and every role is important. Unity Earth, our focus has been on building relationships between different spiritual leaders and artists and musicians and dignitaries of different kinds, as well as NGOs. So we're really building a global community of, if you like, you could call them influencers, although that's not a word that we, deliberately would use. But people that do have an influence over the direction that their communities are going or that other people are going, and wanting to build levels of trust, levels of family, like a family around that. And so there's Buddhist monks, and there's different religious people, there's many musicians and artists and visionaries, there's lots of people who are spiritual but not religious, there's indigenous wisdom holders and keepers. It's a very diverse representation of a human family. We're probably more focused on the spiritual dimension rather than the pure social dimension. But of course, everything's so interconnected. So you can't really be in a spiritual conversation without it having ecological and social repercussions and impact. So, but I guess if we're looking at the big tent, Samir, of how we get into this big tent of world transformation, some people come in through the door of ecological crises. Some people come in through the door of personal crises. Some people come in through the door of spiritual or religious context. I guess for us, it was coming in through an interfaith context. We wanted to do more to promote interfaith understanding between people of different faiths and different spiritual traditions, and then to add like a musical kind of dimension on top of that to make it a little bit more popular and meaningful to a broader audience. And that was the beginning. That was a U-Day festival in Thailand, and that's been kind of the DNA of Unity Earth ever since, a sort of interspiritual musical movement.
You're definitely integrating music with this group of people. These interfaith dialogues are also intermusical dialogues as well. And then you have artists and filmmakers. What was your reason and rationale behind adding the artistic and musical element to this?
Yeah, great question. So, we started, 2008, 2009, my wife and I were in Thailand volunteering, doing some work over there, and an opportunity came up because we knew one of the local Thai Buddhist monks up in the regional area to have a program where Westerners could come and experience the life of a Buddhist monk. It's a very normal thing, and in Thai Theravada Buddhism, it's normal for men and to some degree women, but particularly for men, to ordain throughout their adult life. So we started a program called Monk for a Month in 2009, put it on Facebook. People came from all around the world to experience this deep dive immersion. And from there, we went to Turkey and did a program called Muslim for a Month in 2010. And so that's how I got into sort of the interspiritual, interfaith movement, if you like. I was very interested in building bridges through experience, and that's how it happened. But then when I attended the Parliament of World Religions here in my hometown in 2012, so the Parliament of World Religions first convened in Chicago in 1893, when Vivekananda went to America and did a very famous speech, and it was a sideline to the World's Fair at that time. But it became a much more historic thing than the World's Fair was that particular year. And then the Parliament of World Religions has been going since 1983. Around the world every 3, 4, 5 years. So when it came to Melbourne, I attended it, Samir, and I was amazed by its scale and by its meaning, with the Dalai Lama and cardinals from the Catholic Church and lots of people from all different kinds of traditions, pagans. You name it, people were there. It was very, very inclusive, but it made virtually not a dent in the media here in Melbourne or anywhere else around the world. And I was like, why is it that as soon as something goes wrong in a religious context, the media are like all over it? I mean, rightly so, no problem with that. But then when there's something that's good that's happening, something that's meaningful and newsworthy and significant that's happening, and there's zero interest. And I was like, oh, well, rather than just sit back and complain, let's see if we can, make this a bit more interesting. So adding music and a bit more of a color and broadening it out a bit. So it's not just religions, but it's also people of different spiritual persuasions of all different kinds, and bringing the filmmakers and the more technical side of it with the musical aspect just seemed like adding a nice dimension to it to maybe make it a bit more interesting to a broader audience.
Bringing the musicians with the monks and with the Indigenous leaders, what kind of energy is that created on your tour buses and your events?
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. It's wild. I mean, it's like it's a wild party without any drugs or any alcohol. But it's a wild party in terms of the songs and the music and, as mentioned before, the joy. It's a very palpable part of these experiences. It's the joyfulness in coming together across our differences to celebrate, these universal spiritual truths which we hold dear, that we're all interconnected, that love is our essence, and that it's in community that really we'll find the answers, and that we do find the answers. I think, bringing religious leaders, and look, some of the interfaith work that had been done was really important, but Samir was pretty dry, academic, text-driven. So adding a Bob Marley beat and a little bit of reggae music seems to have done the trick, and it certainly livened it up. And to be really upfront as well, I mean, Bob Marley, what an incredible prophet for humanity, singing about unity and love and peace and reaching millions and millions and tens of millions of people. I mean, that message isn't any different, I think, to the message of the great religious and spiritual teachers. I'm not making out that Bob was perfect, but I'm just saying that if we open our hearts up, we can see that this message and that these truths have been taught and have been lived to certain degrees by so many different people. Put them all together, you create an energy which is unstoppable.
Sounds like you're bringing these interfaith dialogues from the head into the heart, into a more experiential space rather than thinking it through. And that's where spirituality really lives, isn't it? More in the heart than in the head.
Well said. Yeah.
Projecting forwards, and your vision is a unity earth. That's a great vision. How does that look like practically? What kind of systems or ideas do you guys have to bring this unity together?
It's a great question. And like we said before, there are so many groups and so many inspired change makers and visionaries and solutionaries out there, Samir, that are thinking about these very, very things. One of the things I think that makes Unity Earth work as well as it does is that we're not setting out to be everything and do everything and arrive with all of the solutions of anything. We're holding space for the conversation to come and to be held. And these, the reorganization of the world, the reorganization of power, the reorganization of agriculture, the reorganization of labor, these are huge, complex. The reorganization of the relationship of nation states to each other. These are very, very, very large, important questions. We certainly don't claim to be any experts in those spaces. We recognize that we need whole systems transformation, and we know of incredible work being done, thought work being done to think about new systems of eco-based governance, new systems of local-based agricultural methods, and there are many solutions that exist that are out there. I think for us, what's working is really convening a conversation around bringing together the spiritual elements first, and then in a way that's almost like the lead thing, and then behind that follow the economic, the political, the social, environmental, and everything else that comes behind that. And we just thank goodness that there are so many brilliant, talented, dedicated, individuals that are really focused on solving those big problems and those big issues.
What would you like to see happening in the next decade, especially post-pandemic and post-COVID? Just from your own experiences, are there any ideas that you think would be great to see in the world?
Yeah, I think, Samir, we have a vacuum of real leadership on this planet. I think that the institutions that, if you like, rule the world um, are self-serving, and necessarily so, because they were set up that way. I'm not buying into big kind of conspiracy theories here about, the wicked powers that be, although, I'm not necessarily opposing those ideas either. But what I am saying is that the structures, the nation states, or the corporations are essentially, even religious institutions, are essentially there to serve themselves. And to propagate themselves and to create power for themselves. So we see movements, that are really prioritizing nationalism all around the world. And not only that, but the marriage between nationalism and religion is an extraordinarily unholy alliance, whether that's in America or in India or in Burma or wherever it may be. It's something that is really impacting the planet in an unhealthy way. So what I would like to see is an evolution of our global power structures and systems so that true spiritual values can be part of decision-making, can be part of governance, can be part of making choices that affect the planet, both resources for the people and for the other life on this planet. All of life on this planet, as well as the natural world. So I think we need to see a spiritualization of leadership. We need to see values-based leadership. We need to see choices made that are taking the good of the whole into account, and not just my tribe, my country, my religious affiliation. We've got to break beyond this. I mean, otherwise if we don't come together, we're going to continue to fall apart. So it's really to see that next level of wise, rooted in our spiritual traditions, leadership to steward this planet for future generations.
What could people do as a call to action, to start designing this space for people to create better leaders, to create better systems on a micro level and on an individual or a community level? Is there anything people can start doing?
I think people know in their hearts, Samir, I believe that everyone's given a mission, given a purpose, given something that's theirs to do. And I think the best thing you can do for the planet is to really find out what that is and to follow it with all of your heart. Because in the end, what we're really saying is that we're humanity. We don't have all the answers, but we're part of a broader fabric of reality, which includes ultimate intelligence far beyond our meaty brains. And that spiritual intelligence has given each individual a call, a purpose, a mission, a meaning to their life. And it might be something humble. It might be taking care of a family. It might be being an incredible father. It might be being an incredible mother. It could be anything. It could be, running the best corner shop you can run. It doesn't have to be something that looks, anything. It's authentic. Its authenticity is the only thing that really matters. So I think finding your purpose, finding your authentic contribution in whatever ways that is, and then living it with all your heart is the single greatest call to action. It's the single greatest call to action. And if enough of us do that, and if enough of us do that for long enough, together and in collaboration with one another, just like we're doing here, we'll find it won't take that long and the world will be transformed.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Just want to go into World Unity Week. You mentioned there is something happening in June. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, this is really exciting, and I think this is an example of a call to action of, hey, look, we've got this opportunity at the moment. A lot of people are at home. A lot of people are trying different events and campaigns and initiatives, and that's all wonderful. We're really excited with Unity Earth and Partners to be convening World Unity Week, which is June 20 to 28. You might say that sounds a bit longer than a week. It's actually 9 days, but it covers 2 weekends. And it goes for the weekend of the solstice. Obviously, June 2021 is the solstice. For many, many years, World Peace and Prayer Day has been running on the solstice, the summer solstice in the north. Obviously, it's the winter solstice in the south. And Chief Arvil Lookinghorse has been convening World Peace and Prayer Day all over the world for decades. So that's a very powerful date already. Plus, it's the International Day of Yoga is June 21. So the UN International Day of Yoga is June 21. And then the following weekend, we're commemorating the 75th anniversary of signing the UN Charter in San Francisco, as well as the birth of the United Religions Initiative. 20 years old, an amazing global grassroots interfaith organizations where we're global partners with Unity Earth. So there's all these incredible things that are happening, and through our partners at Unify and Uplift and many other places, we'll be broadcasting this World Unity Week out, commemorating the Indigenous, incredible work of World Peace and Prayer Day, International Day of Yoga. What an amazing contribution yoga has made and is making to the world. And there'll be the launch of the Global Purpose Earth Fund inside that week, and then coming on to the second weekend, which is the UN 75th birthday and the URI 20th birthday celebration. So there'll be a lot going on there. So we'll be convening conversations, workshops, dialogues, getting people together from all over the world, from Europe, Africa, Australia, Asia, the Americas, to really come together and have this conversation of what we can do. Plus, it's then a build-up to really, really doing something at scale and historic force in September. So World Unity Week, June 20 to 28 this year.
Where can people see?
So if you check out unity.earth, you'll be able to get links to it, and it'll be broadcast, certainly through a lot of our media partners, and there'll be different channels where you can tune into World Unity Week.
Great. So is there anything else that we've missed out that you might want to talk about?
Look, I'm really excited about the European adventure. It feels like it is something very, very alive. So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we've been building the Caravan of Unity for many, many years across the United States. I'd always wanted to do one in Europe ever since I was in Rumi's mausoleum, and had a very, very powerful experience in Rumi's mausoleum in Konya in central Turkey. And it was a real prophecy about Europe, an awakening in Europe, and a spiritual fire across Europe, which I feel the power of. This is back in 2010. So I'm also coming from, my grandparents are pretty much all from Ireland, and certainly by 3-4 generations, all Irish. And so to the West Coast, County Kerry, my father's father, migrated from County Kerry. So I've got a connection to that part of the world. So this idea of a caravan that went from Konya to Kerry, taking in all the great places and centers in Europe along the way, Sisi in Italy. I mean, there's so many that are powerful, powerful spiritual places. We have friends doing the One Humanity Institute in Auschwitz in Poland, turning it into a World Peace Museum. I mean, there's so much amazing stuff happening across Europe. Not to mention when you get to the UK, there's the amount of stuff, and then right across. So this idea of doing a simultaneous caravan was just something that was thrilling. It's exciting. It's wild. It's full of promise. So to be working with Co-Creating Europe and that whole team and their partners and all their members to put something together for September this year is bold, and it feels like it's going to be absolutely magical.
Any last thoughts? Do you want to share anything about this current crisis? I mean, hopefully within a few months it'll be over, but any thoughts of people who might be listening at this current time?
I think, Samir, the one thing that we can all, pretty much all of us can be better at is and certainly I'm one pointing the finger at myself here, but I think it's important that we find ways to pray together, and not in religious forms, just be able to comfortable to pray together. I think that this crisis is one that prayer is really an important response, individually and collectively in groups. And wouldn't it be great if we could just pray together without the stigma? Oh, is it a Christian prayer? Is it a Muslim prayer? Is it a Hindu prayer? Is it a what is this prayer? What baggage has sort of been attached to it? Wouldn't it be great if we could just, as people of spirit, come together and pray together, to pray for each other, to pray for healing, to pray for hope, to pray for transformation. And I think really prayer can be a great compass for us in these times, as in individuals, as families, and in communities, and in broader communities as well. I
guess an overarching idea that you bring is just coming together, all people at all times enjoy, and kind of holding space. And I think this is a very important thing to do now as ever. But going forward, especially next few years, I think we'll need this more and more and more. But I want to thank you. It's been a great conversation. I'm just absorbing everything you said, but there's so much there. I look forward to the next time we speak. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, Samir. It's really wonderful to meet you, brother, and looking forward to the next time we speak as well. I'd like to hear about the awakening groups that you're doing and the work that you're doing as well. But this movie that you're making, I think, is going to be really, really important.
Thank you.